The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, wrapped in cream-colored silk paper with gold embossing. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. My sister Emma's wedding invitation. The same invitation that had been plastered all over social media for weeks, with Emma proudly declaring it would be the society event of the year. I stood in my kitchen, coffee growing cold in my hand, staring at the envelope. Part of me wanted to throw it straight in the trash, but curiosity won out. I carefully opened it, pulling out the elaborate card inside. "You are cordially invited." I read the first line and snorted. Below the standard wedding text was a handwritten note in my mother's distinctive handwriting. "James, please arrive 3 hours early. We need to discuss your role." My role. I already knew what that meant, and it had nothing to do with being the bride's brother. The next morning, I pulled into the circular driveway of my parents' mansion, the same house where I'd grown up but hadn't visited in months. Emma's white Range Rover was parked out front along with our mother's Mercedes. Perfect. The whole family would be there to deliver whatever news they planned. "You're late," my mother said as soon as I walked in, not bothering with a greeting. She sat perched on the edge of her favorite armchair, already dressed for the day in designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Good morning to you too, Mom," I replied, taking a seat on the couch. Emma sat next to our mother, practically vibrating with what I assumed was either excitement or anger. With Emma, it was often hard to tell the difference. "James," Emma started, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we need to discuss your participation in my wedding." I raised an eyebrow. I thought that's what the invitation was for. "Don't be difficult," my mother snapped. "You know what we mean. Given your current situation, we think it's best if you help out in a different capacity." Ah, there it was. My current situation. Code for the fact that I'd refused to join the family business, choosing instead to build my own tech startup from scratch. In their eyes, I was the family disappointment, the son who'd thrown away a guaranteed future in our father's investment firm to play with computers. "What exactly did you have in mind?" I asked, though I already knew where this was heading. Emma straightened in her chair, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured. "We need someone to help coordinate with the catering staff. Make sure everything runs smoothly. Since you're so intent on working hands-on jobs, we thought you'd be perfect." The insult was clear. They wanted me to work as staff at my own sister's wedding. "Let me get this straight," I said, keeping my voice level. "You want me to work as a waiter at your wedding instead of attending as your brother?" "Don't be dramatic, James," my mother sighed. "Think of it as helping make your sister's day perfect. God knows you haven't contributed much else to this family lately." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same feeling I got every time they dismissed my choices. What they didn't know, what I'd made sure they didn't know, was that my little computer project had caught the attention of one of the biggest tech companies in the country. I'd been in secret negotiations for months, and the acquisition deal was worth more than my father's entire year's profit. "And what if I refuse?" I asked, more out of curiosity than defiance. Emma's sweet facade cracked. "Then don't come at all. I'd rather not have you there than have you embarrass me in front of Jonathan's family. Do you know his father is the CEO of StarTech Industries? I can't have my failure of a brother sitting at the family table." I almost laughed at the irony. StarTech Industries, the very company that was about to acquire my startup for 9 figures. But they didn't need to know that. Not yet. "Fine," I said, standing up. "I'll help with the catering." Emma's triumphant smile made my decision easier. "Perfect. The uniform will be delivered to your apartment. Don't be late. The wedding starts at 4, so we need you there by 1 p.m. sharp." As I drove home, I could have called my lawyer and ended their little power play immediately. One phone call and they'd know exactly who they'd just relegated to serving champagne. But something held me back. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I just wanted to see how far they'd take this. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of final negotiations and paperwork. The acquisition was set to be announced the Monday after Emma's wedding, a detail that made me smile every time I thought about it. The day before the wedding, a garment bag arrived at my apartment containing a white shirt, black pants, and a black vest. Standard catering uniform. I hung it up next to my closet, where a bespoke suit worth more than most cars sat waiting. I'd had it made weeks ago, before I knew I'd be relegated to the kitchen. Running my hand over the fine wool, I made a decision. I play their game, but I bring the suit anyway. Something told me I might need it. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. I'd arrived at the luxury hotel exactly at 1 p.m., parking my understated Audi among the fleet of luxury cars already filling the lot. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could have bought most of those cars with cash. But here I was headed to the service entrance with a uniform under my arm. "You must be James," the catering manager said when I walked in. She looked uncomfortable, clearly aware of who I was. "Your mother explained this situation. We'll have you helping with champagne service during the reception." "Perfect," I said, giving her a reassuring smile. No need to make her more uncomfortable than she already was. I changed into the uniform and spent the next few hours watching the venue transform into Emma's vision of wedding perfection. Flowers worth a small fortune covered every surface, crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the champagne, well, I had to admit they'd spared no expense. Guests began arriving at 3:30. I stayed in the kitchen, watching through the service window as Silicon Valley elite mixed with old money, all here to celebrate the merger of two prestigious families. If they only knew one of their servers was worth more than half the room combined. "Time for the champagne service," the catering manager announced as the ceremony ended. "Everyone remember your assigned sections." I picked up my tray and headed out into the crowd. The weight of the crystal glasses was nothing compared to the weight of the stares I could feel from my family's table. My mother's face was a mask of satisfied superiority, while Emma practically glowed with the power play she'd orchestrated. I was serving the third table when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "James, James Chen." I turned slowly, coming face to face with David Marshall, CEO of StarTech Industries, and my soon-to-be business partner. "What are you doing here?" he asked, looking confused. "And why are you?" His eyes traveled to my uniform, then to where Emma sat at the bride's table. Understanding dawned on his face. "You're the bride's brother," he said slowly. "The one." Whoa. He stopped, clearly putting the pieces together. The room had gone quiet, attention drawn by the CEO's obvious surprise. Emma was half standing at her table, face growing pale. "Is something wrong, David?" Jonathan's mother called out, looking between us with growing concern. David Marshall looked at me, then at Emma, then back to me. "James, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't you the founder of Tech Fusion? The company we're announcing the acquisition of on Monday?" The champagne glasses on my tray clinked softly in the dead silence that followed. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. My mother's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips, and Emma's face had gone from pale to ashen. I carefully set my tray down on the nearest table, straightening my server's vest as I turned to face David Marshall. "Yes, that's correct," I said, my voice carrying in the quiet room, though I wasn't planning to discuss business at my sister's wedding. David laughed, a booming sound that seemed to break the spell of silence. "Discuss business. James, you're about to become one of the youngest billionaires in tech. Why on earth are you serving champagne at your sister's wedding?" The word billionaire echoed through the room like a thunderclap. I heard my mother's champagne glass shatter on the marble floor. "There must be some mistake," Emma said, rushing over with Jonathan in tow. Her white dress rustled frantically as she moved. "James works at some small startup. He's nothing but a small startup," David interrupted, his eyebrows shooting up. "Tech Fusion's revolutionary AI platform is about to transform the entire industry. That's why StarTech is acquiring it for $4.2 billion. He turned to Jonathan, his son. "Didn't you mention this at home?" "I've been talking about this deal for months." Jonathan looked as shocked as everyone else. You never mentioned the founder's name, Dad. I had no idea." "Well, this is awkward," David said, looking around at the stunned faces. "I assumed everyone knew, given that." He gestured between Emma and me, clearly uncomfortable. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "It's fine, David," I said smoothly. "My family and I have different views on success. They preferred I help with the catering today." Emma made a strangled sound. "James, we didn't know." "Clearly," I replied, my voice cool. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I should get back to my duties. There are still 3 tables that need champagne." "The hell you will," David said firmly. He turned to the crowd of guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to James Chen, founder and CEO of Tech Fusion." and one of the most brilliant minds in artificial intelligence, and apparently the bride's brother. The whispers started immediately. I could see phones coming out, people quickly Googling my name and company. My mother had sunk into her chair, her face a mask of horror. James, my father spoke for the first time, standing up from his table. Son, why didn't you tell us? Would it have mattered? I asked quietly. When I tried to explain my work 3 years ago, you called it a waste of time. When I needed seed funding, you told me to stop playing with computers and get a real job. When I moved out of the family estate to be closer to my office, he said I was throwing my life away. I straightened my shoulders. So no, I didn't tell you. I didn't tell any of you. Emma stepped forward, her perfect makeup starting to smear from tears. But you let us treat you like what, Emma? I asked. Like staff? Like someone beneath you? Yes, I did. Because I wanted to see if any of you would stand up for me, family fortune or not. Clearly, I got my answer. David cleared his throat. James, there's a spare suit in my car. My driver can get it for you. Please, join us at the table. I smiled but shook my head. Thank you, David, but I actually brought my own. I turned to the catering manager who had been watching the scene unfold. Would you mind if I took a brief break to change? She nodded quickly, probably grateful for any excuse to escape the tension in the room. Perfect, I said. I'll be right back. As I walked toward the service area where I'd stored my suit, I heard the explosion of conversation behind me. My phone was already buzzing with notifications. No doubt the story was spreading through social media like wildfire. In the small staff changing room, I took my time removing the server's uniform and putting on my bespoke suit. The charcoal gray wool was a far cry from the polyester vest I'd been wearing. I checked my appearance in the mirror, adjusted my tie, and took a deep breath. When I returned to the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. People who had ignored me minutes before now rushed to introduce themselves. Venture capitalists who wouldn't have given me the time of day were suddenly eager to discuss potential investments. I made my way to the family table, where my mother sat still as a statue, my father looked shell-shocked, and Emma seemed to be having a heated whisper conversation with Jonathan. James, my mother started as I approached. Darling, we had no idea. I held up a hand to stop her. Mom, let's not do this now. This is Emma's wedding day after all. We wouldn't want to make a scene. The irony of my words wasn't lost on anyone at the table. David appeared at my side, champagne in hand, the expensive kind that had been reserved for the special guests. Here, he said, handing me the glass. I think you deserve this more than anyone. I accepted the glass with a nod of thanks. To the happy couple, I said, raising it slightly. Emma burst into tears and rushed from the table, her wedding dress swishing behind her. Jonathan looked torn between following his bride and staying to damage control the situation with his father. Go, I told him. She's your wife. She needs you. He gave me a grateful look and hurried after Emma. Well, David said, taking a seat next to me. This is certainly not how I expected to announce our partnership. I couldn't help but laugh. Life has a funny way of working out, doesn't it? That it does, he agreed. Though I have to ask, why didn't you say anything when you found out Jonathan was my son? I shrugged. It wasn't relevant to our deal. I wanted StarTech to acquire Tech Fusion because it was the right move for both companies, not because of any family connections. David nodded approvingly. That's exactly why you're going to do incredibly well in this industry. He glanced at my still shocked parents. Though I have to admit, I'm curious about one thing. Just one. I asked, raising an eyebrow. Why did you go along with? He gestured at the server's uniform hanging in the staff area. All of this? You could have stopped it at any time. I took a sip of champagne, considering my answer. The truth was, I'd been asking myself the same question all day. I guess I needed to know, I said finally. I needed to see if anything had changed, if they had changed. I looked around the grand ballroom, at the faces that now watched me with calculating interest. Money changes how people treat you, David, but it doesn't change who they are. The rest of the wedding reception passed in a blur of forced smiles and awkward conversations. Emma eventually returned, her makeup freshly fixed, but her eyes still red. She spent the remainder of her wedding reception shooting glances at me between greeting guests, her perfect day thoroughly derailed by the revelation of her brother's success. I stayed at the family table, now seated in a place of honor next to David Marshall, quietly observing the shifting dynamics around me. It was fascinating how quickly people's attitudes had changed. The same relatives who had smirked at my catering job earlier were now falling over themselves to mention our childhood connections. Remember when James used to fix our computers at family gatherings? Aunt Sarah gushed to anyone who would listen. I always knew he was special. I remembered those days differently. I remembered her complaining to my mother about how I was wasting time with those machines instead of pursuing a proper career like my cousins. As the evening wore on, my mother made several attempts to speak with me privately, but I politely deflected each time. This wasn't the moment for that conversation. My father, on the other hand, sat in uncharacteristic silence, occasionally staring at me as if seeing a stranger. Around midnight, as the reception was winding down, Emma finally approached me directly. She had changed out of her wedding dress into a simpler white evening gown. Her shoulders slumped in a way that would have horrified our mother's etiquette teacher. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. "Please?" I nodded and followed her to a quiet corner of the ballroom. For a moment, we stood in awkward silence, the weight of years of competition and resentment hanging between us. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "God, James, I'm so sorry. What we did, what I did, it was cruel." "Yes," I agreed simply, "it was." She flinched at my directness. I thought you were throwing your life away. Everyone said you were just playing around with computers, avoiding real responsibility. I thought," she trailed off, looking lost. "You thought what, Emma? That humiliating me at your wedding would somehow fix me, make me conform to what you and our parents wanted?" "No. Well, maybe. I don't know anymore." She wrapped her arms around herself. "When Mr. Marshall said you were worth billions, I thought I was going to be sick. Not because of the money, but because I realized how horrible we've been to you. All this time, you were building something amazing, and we were too busy judging you to even notice." I studied my sister's face, seeing real regret there for the first time in years. "You know what's ironic?" I said. "If any of you had bothered to actually ask about my work, to show even a moment of genuine interest, I would have told you everything. I wanted to share my success with my family, but you were all so convinced I was a failure that you never even gave me the chance." "I know that now," she said, tears forming in her eyes again. "Can you ever forgive me?" I was quiet for a long moment, considering her question. "I don't know, Emma. Forgiveness isn't something you earn in one conversation. It takes time, and more importantly, it takes change. Real change, not just regret because you found out I'm rich." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I understand. But, can we try? To start over, I mean." "We can try," I agreed. "But there need to be some ground rules. First, no more attempts to control my life or career choices. Second, I want genuine relationships, not ones based on what anyone thinks I should be. And third," I paused, making sure I had her full attention, "I want you to really think about why you treated me the way you did. Not just today, but for years. Because if we're going to have any kind of relationship moving forward, that needs to change." "It will," she promised. "I'll do better. We'll all do better." Just then, Jonathan appeared at her side. "The car's ready," he said softly, then turned to me. "James, I want you to know I had no idea about any of this. If I had known." "You would have what?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Stopped it? Told Emma and our parents they were wrong? Or would you have just treated me differently because of my bank account?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I hope I would have done the right thing." "Well," I said, "I guess we'll never know. But going forward, maybe we can all try to do the right thing regardless of someone's perceived worth." They both nodded, and after a moment of awkward silence, Emma stepped forward and hugged me. It was brief and tentative, nothing like the casual affection we'd shared as children, but it was a start. As they turned to leave, Emma paused. Will you come to Sunday dinner next week? Mom's already planning it. She wants to make your favorite dessert." I couldn't help but laugh. "Of course she is. Tell her I'll think about it." After they left, I found myself alone in the rapidly emptying ballroom. David Marshall had already departed, but not before scheduling a breakfast meeting to discuss our upcoming announcement. The catering staff was cleaning up, and I noticed they were treating me with the same deference they'd shown the other guests all evening. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace, my best friend and the only person who'd known about my success all along. How did it go? Did they faint when they found out? I smiled as I typed back, no fainting, but Mom did drop her champagne glass. Call you tomorrow with details. As I walked to my car, I thought about everything that had happened. The day hadn't gone anything like what my family had planned. But maybe that was for the best. Sometimes it takes a dramatic shakeup to break old patterns and force people to see their own behavior clearly. The next morning, I woke up to hundreds of messages and missed calls. But I ignored them all in favor of making my usual morning coffee and sitting on my balcony. The sun was rising over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my mother, this one asking if I'd like to meet for lunch to discuss everything. I took a sip of coffee and thought about Emma's invitation to Sunday dinner. Part of me wanted to decline to make them work harder for forgiveness. But another part remembered the genuine regret in Emma's eyes, the shock on my father's face, the way my mother's hands had trembled when she tried to speak to me later in the evening. Maybe it was worth giving them a chance to prove they could change. Not for the billions or the business success, but for the relationship we might have had all along if they'd just accepted me for who I was. I picked up my phone and typed a reply to my mother. Not lunch, but I'll think about Sunday dinner, on one condition. We talk about who we are, not what we're worth. Her response came immediately. Anything you want, sweetheart. We have so much to make up for. I set the phone down and looked out over the city again. The truth was, I didn't need their approval anymore. I'd built my success without it, proven myself without their support. But maybe, just maybe, we could build something new from the ashes of yesterday's revelations. Not the relationship they tried to force, but something authentic, based on who we really were rather than who they thought we should be. As I finished my coffee and prepared for my breakfast meeting with David, I couldn't help but smile at the irony of it all. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even or proving people wrong. Sometimes it's about standing firm in who you are and letting others realize their own mistakes. My phone buzzed one final time, a message from Emma. I know I don't deserve it, but thank you for not completely ruining my wedding when you could have. And I'm sorry we almost ruined it ourselves. I typed back a simple response. That's what family is supposed to be about, isn't it? Even when we mess up. Because in the end, that's what this was all about. Not the money, not the success, not even the vindication. It was about family, the ones we're born with and the ones we choose to become. And maybe, just maybe, my family would finally choose to become something better.